Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dynasty Six Pack. And tonight, very special topic. It's the highest bidding topic among my fantasy draft order, and it is auction drafts. So sit tight. Going once, going twice. It's the intro. I never know how I'm going to do the intro. It's almost like blind bidding to a certain extent, but I guess that's just another auction term. And yes, it's all about auctions tonight. I'm your very happy host to be here, especially every week, but especially for this topic, Kyle Senra. Joining me are my co-hosts, Rahul Natarajan. You will have auction experience soon, so welcome to the episode.
These are the last few days of my non-auction experience in fantasy football. Kyle and I do have a league starting up at the end of June. Will be my first ever auction draft, let alone salary cap contract league. So I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot, and this is the perfect kind of episode for someone like me. I'm going to be part of the audience for large parts of today, so very excited today, Kyle, and also great to see you and Jamie, of course, excited for this one.
Well, it might be my favorite background yet today. Anyone who wants to check out on the Fantasy Six Pack YouTube channel to see Jamie's weekly background changes, which is one of the funnest parts of the episode. It's like the Simpsons couch gag. It's that legendary. And of course, the legend behind all that is Jamie Perog. How you doing, Jamie?
I'm doing great. Allergies are acting up, so I'm glad I'm not going to be talking a lot this episode, but I'll be throwing in my 2 cents here and there. As long as the price isn't wrong.
Yeah, don't want to get Bob Barker or anything, especially on the golf shirt. Very appropriate, right? Like the Rory coaster. Man, Happy Gilmore. What a Rory coaster of a career he had. That's almost as ridiculous as McIlroy himself. But yeah, they're not here to talk about golf. That's Keith Fleming's excellent show. Check that out. Also on the Fantasy Six Pack Network, which is where we have a lot of great shows. And so feel free to check out the Fantasy Six Pack YouTube, for instance. I've got a lot of great live streams there. Also video content, and yeah, sure to like all the videos, subscribe to the channel, of course, and sure to leave us comments. If you leave comments here in the Dynasty Six Pack episodes, we'll definitely get back. And who knows, we've in the past even chose trades of the week from that section. But yeah, not this week. This is it's all about the salary cap and the contracts and auction drafts specifically is going to be the main topic. But I guess like you, Rahul, my first experience with auctions was in a salary cap contract league. So I'm used to like that jump. And it's funny how I think I talked about that in the Fantasy Favorites episode, that just straight up auction league I won. That was kind of a big step. It's okay. This isn't just a process I do that works in the salary cap contract world. Like I can kind of translate to any auction. I mean, dynasty or redraft. So people who do redraft auctions, like there's total applicability from this episode. So yeah, we can, it's Dynasty auctions, because we are a Dynasty Six Pack, will certainly be the focus. Get down to specifics, but the process for myself to prepare for an auction really is the same, regardless of the type of league. So, is there, Jamie? I know you have some auction experience. Is there anything you want to talk about before we get to the auction sheet process, as I call it?
I only do like about one a year, and it used to be live. Every year we would get together, and it's just such a fun time because, you got a bunch of friends sitting around, and, you can smack talk while you're throwing players out and making fun of people's bids. But online is like a totally different animal. I prefer doing it in person live, but I do recommend that if you do it in person, you have a separate person that's not in the league as the auctioneer, because they want to also participate.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely heard of leagues like hiring professional auctioneers. But yeah, it could be someone is just keeping a clock, and there's a buzzer to go when the clock's like, you can do things even if it's someone's intimidated to try and do the $1, $2, you have to do it quickly. Even I'm a little scared to try it right now. I've already made a fool of myself. That's part of the Rory coaster. the me. Yes, but yes, I guess this is me auction leagues, and yeah, I love. At first, when Jamie had that background, I thought it was Lego people, but then I realized no, it's not. That's just animated people. It's not Lego at all. Yeah, but yes, auction draft. So yeah, I guess it's interesting that for me, it's kind of almost a paradox. Auctions. It's the format that I think requires the most preparation, but also requires the most flexibility. So there's just a lot of time investment, to think about and prepare, but also in draft, I think. Which Jamie, would you think it's fair, like, to say flexibility is a key part of the in draft strategy for auctions?
Yeah, you got to be flexible. You're not always going to get the guys you want, but you always have a chance to get them. It just depends on how much you're willing to spend.
Yeah, it's all about what those prices are. And I know, we're going to get to some questions later. I mean, obviously, we'll get to questions in the live chat. So again, head over to the Dynasty Six Pack YouTube page, Facebook page, where we're live. If you want to ask live questions, we're going to have questions.
I think we already have a live question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Can we auction of all these sexy hosts?
Yeah, can we auction off all these sexy hosts?
You missed an
goes
F off, and you missed an S in host because you would have to be
dummy.
plural there.
Yeah, whoever's in it, you dummy.
The C should have been capitalized.
God knocked the price down for Jamie then. He doesn't know his grammar too well.
Yeah.
But he makes these awesome backgrounds. I mean, auction league is spelled properly in the background, so good job.
You can just...
That's the important part. We'll take the comment off. No one will know.
Yeah, just bid $1 on me. No one wants that trash.
The minimum price, right? But yes, it's funny because that's almost where I do begin in the auction sheet process. But I guess other question. I mean, Rahul, chime in too. But whenever you approach a new league, regardless of whether it's a redraft dynasty, any type of podcast content creators probably heard say this. But what's the most important thing the first thing you do when you join a league?
Well, I feel like I'm being put on the spot, but I feel like I heard stay flexible. And if I could take that to a even more cliched level, it'd be zig while there's zag. That one has to make it into each a startup draft, any form of draft podcast that I'm sure is out there. But I hope that staying flexible is the idea was the answer you're looking for. I can certainly see on an auction draft how you're going to have to. You just don't know. There's so many variables, whereas like in a normal linear draft, you're like tied to like certain areas of the boards, and like certain players are just like completely out of access just for you. Like in like a normal redraft this year, unless you get the 101 or 102, you're probably not going to get Saquon Barkley in most leagues. But I'm sure in auction, that's probably one of the appeals that you have for the format. Kyle?
Well, to a certain extent, like, because I mean, in a snake draft, you're picking every so often. I mean, of course, dynasty startups, you might trade picks, and there might be long gaps to that pick, but eventually you're going to have picks. In auction, you never know when your next player is. Like, you've got to be bidding to actually get those players. So it's the balance, right, between going to get those players and also making sure you have enough money to get as many players as you want.
So balance, not flexibility, was the answer that you're looking for.
Both, but actually, balance wasn't even the answer. That was a really good point to bring up. But Jamie, first thing you join a league, what do you look at?
Scoring is the first thing that I look at.
Not even scoring, but the league settings, right?
League settings. So like,
you want to know if it's super flex, for instance, right? Like that's a.
Yeah, so I look at is it a start 8, is it a start 9?
Exactly.
Do they include kickers or defenses? Because then I'll just leave right away, so it makes it easier. But yeah, no, it's always scoring and the settings, of course.
That was absolutely the answer. I don't know what I thought.
That's okay. Hey, again, you brought up a good point though, right? Like balance. You brought it to the point. Balance is important. Flexibility, balance, all keywords. But I guess the keywords I'll throw up on screen are auction sheet. And yeah, this is how I start the process of any auction draft. I've had a lot of success ever since I've been using the auction sheet. And so it's just a spreadsheet I have, Google Sheets or any type of Excel type sheet. I guess that's another brand name. I don't know what's the non-brand name for that, but any type of spreadsheet, I suppose, that you can use. And it starts with settings. And for scoring settings, there's other settings I look at that I like that are the first thing to start this, because so much of the first step of the auction sheet has nothing to do with specific players, and that's where the scoring settings will really determine the order of players. But the two things I look at, I mean, Jim, you said starters. Number of starters I think is important, but just total players, total roster spots, starters and bench, but also how it's broken down. That's like the very first thing I want to know for any league, because that's the parameters of what you're dealing with, of how many players are going to be in this auction. Now, I've seen leagues where in an auction draft, maybe it's 30-man roster, but you only have to leave the auction with 20. I'd probably use that as the number. Okay, what is the minimum number of players that will be bid on in the auction? Other formats, and as you'll learn, Rahul, Reality Sports Online, which is the format I started getting, Dynasty, but also auctions, all started with that format. That's whatever the roster spots are, you have to fill your entire roster by the end of the auction. So that's just knowing about your format of how that's going to work. Is like that. Even that's drastically different. Like, it's not just as simple as how many roster spots available. Sometimes it is a difference, but whatever your number of players in the auction sheet is going to be, you have to identify. That's the very first thing. The second thing is, how do we win players? Is with money. How much money is available, and per team, but also for the league total. And so in a startup draft, it'll be easy because everyone will have the same money going in. If you're in a salary cap contract league, and as we're going to show with this sheet here, it's not the first year of the draft. So, there's going to be players on contracts on different teams, so not everyone's going to have the same number of cap space, but it's still important to figure out that total amount. And so just want a global view of what is the ideal league view of the total number of players in the auction, how much money is available to bid on those players. Now, Jamie brought up a point, like bidding $1, bidding the minimum. That's really the first step of building the auction sheet, is understanding of those players that'll be available. Not all of them are going to be bid on. In an auction, there's inevitably going to be tons of players, and I shouldn't say tons, but there's going to be a certain percentage of players that are are nominated and no one bids on, and so that you win them for the minimum amount. In some leagues, that might vary in terms of the percentage of that happening. And I think, Jamie, to your point, how many starters are there? That to me is the first real decision, because the total rosters, total number of money available, those are kind of, okay, what are the league settings say? But then that decision of, okay, how many starters versus bench, and how is that going to impact the very first decision you have to make with the auction sheet is how many players of the total roster spots are you excluding from the sheet? And how many players, how many percentage do you ideally think should go for the minimum amount? So that's kind of, it's funny because you think you start from the top, you actually start from the very bottom. How many players you're actually taking out that you think are worth rostering, but aren't worth rostering more than just for the minimum? And I think that's actually a really important group to identify, who those players are, but more importantly, what the number of those players you think should be. So that's really the first decision. I'll get to the percentages I use, and I'll provide concrete examples for this league I'm going to show. So everything I said up to this date makes sense before I really dive in heavy here?
So far, so good.
Okay, should I share the auction sheet now?
Yeah, I think it'll be good to have a guideline to what we're discussing too. But that was a good overview. Yeah.
All right. So let me just hide some of these logos, because I know that does interfere with that. Okay. I should have set this up earlier. I should have transitioned better. I should have asked a question. I could have done so many more things. So I'm just going to ramble on until time comes. I think we are good. Okay. I could definitely zoom in. All right. So here we go. Auction sheets. So for this particular league, again, we're in, we started in 2015. So this is year 11 now. But any type of format where it is multi-year contracts, and there's limits to how many contracts you can give, there's inevitably going to be players that aren't on teams. And that's why every year in these salary cap contract formats, like Reality Sports Online, you do a rookie draft, but you also have the free agent auction. So, hey, you have to do 2 drafts every year, which isn't that amazing. But what a format, right? To create that type of atmosphere to get 2 drafts. But so in this particular format, the amount of I guess the one thing to know is the salary cap is always equal to whatever the NFL salary is. This year it's 279 million or something like that. We'll find out in our league, Rahul, because everyone will have that cap space going into it. But in this league, of course, no one does. Everyone's got players on their team. But I calculated the total cap space available across the whole league at 804,383,542. Just to get really specific, we really want to. And then knowing that players' minimum amount is 500,000. So that just like that's for context sake. So the minimum on this sheet's actually 0.5 instead of 1. So you will see 1 in some spots. I also calculated there were 90 roster spots available to be bid on in the league. So right there's like the two facets: 804 million and 90 roster spots. Then the decision comes through. How many of those 90 players am I excluding? And I use percentages between 33% and 67%. And Jamie, I think one of your questions you were going to ask me was, do you use the studs and scrubs strategy? And I think that might be people think auction, that might be the first place to go. And maybe that's where I'll start with this, is if you are going to approach with the studs and scrubs type of strategy, you want to use like a 67% minimum. So you're going to eliminate a ton of players that you think are worth rostering, but you're going to identify them as minimum players to pick up later. These are players you're going to nominate and hope that no one bids them up just so you get them for free. Or the thought that the way I'm approaching it, they're not worth bidding up. So anyone who bids them up more than the minimum, that's taking money away and maybe helping my ultimate goal, which is I'm going to throw all the money available I have towards just several key players. Now, I would say I put it as 67%, 2/3 as like really like the most aggressive ways. You maybe want to be around 60%. And I guess the idea is studs and scrubs. Like, how would you define it, Jamie? Because I've got a kind of a clear view of like where I would draw the line or how aggressive I would go with that.
So scrubs and studs and scrubs, what I would do is I would just put $1 bid on every single one of my bench players and then allocate the rest of it at like 55% receivers, 12% tight end, so on and so on. But like I want studs in my starting lineup, and then I'll just fill out my bench with dollar players.
Exactly. I draw it as all the starters I have, however many start I want to use this strategy more in a start 8, start 9 where you can control it better. I'm going to identify 8, 9 players that I'm going to bid up. I'm going to win them. If I get any more than that, great. But I'm going to be as aggressive as I can to get 8 players, let's say in a start 8. And then, the rest I'm going to have used up so much money that I'm almost going to have no choice but to just nominate players and hope I get them the rest of the way through. But I'll fill my bench that way easily. And maybe even there might be some good players that make it to waivers that I'm still comfortable doing that with, right?
Yeah.
So that's the idea. I don't want to do that in a start 13 because then you're really pushing it. Like, okay, I'm putting all my money towards just 13 players. You might get caught in the middle at points where you're thinking too much about depth and you're not winning enough of the top end players. But if you go after them, you might not have the proper depths. And I think like a start 13, I'd push towards 33% minimum. I'm eliminating less players from the bidding up process. That means there's going to be more players I'm willing to bid up, but those top end players aren't going to necessarily be as aggressively high up as relative to other players. It's still going to work in kind of a stepwise motion, as I'll show here. But I think so. That's like really the first decision. And for this particular league, it's funny because when I first came up with the auction process, it was after having done this league a few years. So I was able to, when I approach this and make this decision, what am I going to use as that minimum amount? And I thought, well, why guess? I'll just go back to last year's results. And like looking at last year, there was the total contracts, it looked right around 42%. And you guys, fans of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Never seen it.
No. Well, 42 is the answer to everything. That's not huge spoiler. It's just more of a hilarious joke. But it's also that's always funny. Anytime the answer to anything is 42, of course it is. That's the answer to everything. But that's really where it kicked it off. And it's a 10-team league, but it's start 12. So I think that makes sense that it's below 50%. Okay, depth is more important here. I mean, it's 10-team league, but we have to start 3 running backs. We have to start 4 wide receivers minimum, and then there's flex spots on top of that. So it's positional scarcity at those spots especially can kind of get a little scary at times. So depth is actually pretty important, even though it's just a 10-team league. But because we pushed the starters out to 12, it really makes that important. So that's why I used 42%. Anyway, so remember 90 roster spots, 42% of 90 is 37.8. So I'll cleanly round it up to 38. So that meant of those 90 players, I'm taking 38 out of the actual auction sheet. As you'll see, that leaves 52 players. And as you'll see, the auction sheet, 52. Is it changing? It is changing. Good. Okay. Yeah. So as you see, number 52 is like the last player that I think is worth bidding up, more like players worth more than the minimum given the right circumstances. So I work with like that number. So then I suddenly, instead of it being 90, it's 52. But you also have to take away the corresponding money. If I'm, in this instance, 38 players at minimum contracts at $500,000 each is 19 million total. Typically, you go one for one if it's a $1 minimum. Have a mini minimum contract, you're taking that many dollars off the cap. In this case, it's half of it because the half because we're dealing with millions. It's just way easier to calculate everything in millions instead of so many decimal points. As Rahul pointed out earlier, it's still apparently I have too many. Because I part of it is because the intervals we end up seeing a lot in the league still go by $500,000, but sometimes they're still less. Like we'll see contracts that aren't so cleanly just always
That makes sense.
rounded out. Yeah. So that's why I kind of do it like this. But yeah, so with these new numbers, which are now what was it? It was instead of 804 million, it was 785 million, and now 52 roster spots. The first thing I do is calculate an average. What is the like middle player of this 52? In this case, 26. You want to know half that? Divisions by 2 are important here, especially. So like the 26th player, and I always find that middle ground. I push it one more, so you'll see here this 27th player is what that average is. It's 785.383 divided by 52, which is 15 million point, and then the decimal point. That's why I made that one stand out, because it's like that's the originator, right? This is where I'm kind of the starting point. And the reason I always put it one below is because inevitably, if you put it exactly at the halfway point, your last number, in this case 52, would actually be 0. That sort of defeats the purpose, because this is supposed to be a player that's more than the minimum. You're not supposed to take it to 0. So 26 is the halfway point. So this middle spot is actually at 27. And then from there, you got to figure out how to get to each extreme. You ultimately know you're going to end up at this number at the bottom. But how do you get there? You actually have to figure out this exact number here. That's why that's also written out long, because it's also an important number. And it's the ability, it's the number that lets you get to this like stepwise motion where every player from this point to the bottom is slightly less, but also by the same amount, at least in this first column. And what you do is you take this average, in this case, 15.1 million, and you divide it by half the number of players that are in this chart. So you divide it by, in this case, the 26, half of the 52. And that will get you from here down to this interval that it creates, which in this case is 0.581. And so that means each one of these contracts moving upwards from there is by this exact same interval. And it goes all the way to the middle ground average, and that's what lets you get to the very top, which is ultimately the funnest, most important part. How much should I spend on the most expensive? All right, and then once you have this first column set up, I think that's when you get to the players. Because I think up to this point, it's all about the numbers. Okay, there's 52 players I think are worth bidding more than the minimum. And now I've identified what the most expensive player should be, the second most expensive, in an equal world where they all move in the exact same, like the difference between them is exactly equal.
Mm-hmm.
We know that's not always the case. Not everything's mathematically equal, but at least you get that reference point to start. And then you finally get to talk about players. So any questions you guys want to ask? Anything that I didn't necessarily explain properly?
No, I think you hit it all. I'm just trying to take this all in because I'm not familiar with a lot of this. So I'm trying to learn as we go.
That's a smart way. That's a smart way of doing it. I'm following it so far. I'm excited for the next one. Yeah.
Well, the scoring settings would now come in, because now once you have these 52 spots kind of ranked out, what a typical price should be, an average price should be. Now you now you put the players in. Okay, who are actually the players? If you're doing a startup, then you follow your dynasty rankings and figure out where your tier breaks are. Ultimately, in this league, it's okay. Go to the free agent list on RSO and look. Okay, who are the players that are actually available that aren't on teams anymore? And then we get obviously this list here of players, and it was up to me to kind of rank them out. And I am ranking for the subjective sake of my team. And, you'll notice a lot of running backs at the top, maybe higher than they would be or should be in a typical dynasty setting. I think the beauty of this, though, is that however you approach, whether it's like a salary cap contract league, whether it's a dynasty league, or just a straight up redraft league, that's just how you change your rankings, how your players will change. And then again, Jamie, as you mentioned earlier, that's where your scoring incentives will come into place. How does this league score? Now you actually do talk about specific players. So whether it's a dynasty or redraft or however the format is, it gets different from here, but everything up to this point will be the same thing no matter what you do. At least that's how I like to approach my options. So do you guys want to go through the players? Or I guess do I continue to the next step?
I guess the players, it's just, based on your team need, you're kind of ranking all the ones you would bid up on.
Yeah, I mean, this was 6 running backs that are all like lead back, practically workhorse backs, and Davante Adams. He was him being available is a pretty big deal. Again, you have to start 3 running backs, 4 wide receivers. Mm-hmm. It is a super flex league, but I know for myself, I've got Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts, and both on I think 3 years left on their contracts each, and Daniels will have like a 5th-year option, and both have potentials to be extended as well. So I'm pretty set at quarterback, but I also still value it. Okay, Baker Mayfield is legit. So part of me also thinks I have to rank him high in my option sheet because I have to be disciplined, and even if I don't need him, I can't let him go past a certain price. Like he has to. I can't let someone get him just so cheap. Because if he's going to be that cheap, I'll take him as a 3rd guy, and that's potential trade target to get players that aren't in the auction. I mean, he's the kind of key to get you like access to players that aren't necessarily here. So I made sure to rank him highly, and then sorry.
So that kind of leads me to a question I was going to ask you later. Like, how important is bluffing and like faking an interest in a player like Baker Mayfield? So since you have him ranked so high, would you let someone else get him cheaper, or would you bid him up to make sure someone else overpays that needs him?
I wouldn't say overpays because I think there's something called price enforcing. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, Jamie, or if you've seen it applied. But essentially, this player should go for this price, so I'm going to bid him up to that price. But then once it gets past that price, even if it's one bid higher, you feel like that's an overpay, right? Like even if it's not a massive overpay.
Well, that's when you would just kind of cut it off and be like, no, you max paid for him.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. Yeah, no, exactly. You want to make sure he gets up to a certain point. Again, if you've got the money and if you're willing, because at any point, by price enforcing, that other person could bail out, and then you're stuck with the player. Okay, maybe cheaper than I thought he should have gone for, but I don't really want him. And again, maybe it's a good trade candidate. Like a guy like Baker, I think would qualify. If anyone does need a quarterback, and the contract's cheap enough, that kind of does help move it a bit, like with cap space being limited. So that's why I kind of had Baker here. Hoping I wouldn't have to be the one that would bid him up to this price, essentially. Like I was really hoping like enough people would be interested that it would just naturally bid up there.
So I remember doing that last year. I was like bidding up on Jamar Chase, and then all of a sudden people just stopped bidding, but it was like $12 less than I had them valued at. So what I did is I took that $12 and I added it to my receiver core percentages, and I ended up getting CeeDee Lamb also.
Well, I mean, yeah, there you go, right? And that's not even price enforcing. That's just getting the elite players, right? Like that's getting the guys at the top of your list. Like that's what you want to do in theory. I think price enforcing is more, I don't necessarily want this player, but I also don't want to let the league, someone else have him for so cheap. Like you probably wanted CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase, right, Jamie? Like those are players I want to roster.
Well, I didn't expect to get. I just didn't expect to get both of them because of the allocation of my percentage that I put on my receivers. but I ended up getting both of them. And
And
I also got Drake London also.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's the way to do it, right? I mean, that's it's. I think it's a lot easier to do if it's the players you want to have. It's tougher to do when it's a player you don't want to have, and that's where you might let someone go. But it's also okay if they get him cheap, they get him cheap. But maybe I should have made them pay more, but then you also alleviate the risk of getting stuck. So it's a delicate balance. I think the better the player, the easier it is to try and price them for. If it's not that great a player and you just think, oh, they're undervalued, it's a position I'm already deep at, and like I don't really like them that much. Like that's probably the time you just let them go cheap. And maybe if you don't like them and you think they're overvalued and they're gonna be a dud, they're not gonna pay their price off. Maybe that'll happen, and you'll be happy you avoided them. So, and I know Jamie, you talked about positional allocation, and that was again another question I was going to answer of yours through this, but I did used to do that. I approached this particular RSO league like that, a few of the early auctions, and I didn't necessarily get the success I wanted. Still haven't won this league, but I feel like I've won almost every other auction or salary cap league I've done since this. The one I joined last year and missed the playoffs. Obviously, that's the 1 year. So year 2, baby. Here comes the comeback, because I've definitely done that in an RSO league before. Missed the playoffs and then win the whole thing in year 2. So hoping for that. But yeah, this is I find better to just price every player as opposed to allocate per position. And I think to a certain extent, Jamie, I will naturally do that. If you pick a position to punt, I find that's really easy to do. You can say, this is a position where I'm going to limit this specific spot. And it could be, I do it with the tight end in a lot of leagues where I can. I guess that's my one auction secret that isn't so secret, because you'll notice it is like, you do an auction with me, you'll see the pattern of nominations for sure. And I'm not ashamed to admit this is how I go about it. It eventually will work. And if everyone's going to just bid up so much on tight ends, and they're wasting extra roster spots on tight ends. So it's almost a foolproof way. If you don't value tight ends, you just keep nominating tight ends and let other people just bid on them, even if it's a little bit. And you just keep nominating until you get that one where no one bids you up. You just get it for the minimum, and it makes it all worth it. You hope it's a good enough tight end, and if they suck, week 1, drop them for the guy on the waivers that got targets. That's all. But it's also the mechanism, like, don't spend much on a player where you're going to be also know you're going to cut them. So I do that with tight ends. Some people might play a strategy where they bid up super high on 2 wide receivers like you did, Jamie. If I was doing that with Lamb and Chase, how I might approach it, my 3rd wide receiver, I'm going to try to get as cheap as possible. I'm going to be aggressive at every other position. So in addition to Chase and Lamb, I can get elite players at other positions. My 3rd wide receiver.
Uh-oh. I think Kyle froze.
That would be kind of a way you can identify this specific spot. I'm going to spend as little as possible, so I can spend as much as possible everywhere else. But those bigger amounts, I don't tend to play it by percentage. I'm really playing it by player. And I guess, Jamie, the control I find I have is the way I rank the players is that my control on that. And I think rankings are important, but we always talk about how tiers are important too. And I think they're especially important here. And you'll see through the auction how I kind of utilize tiers to adjust pricing. And I guess that's really the next step. Once you have your player rankings in, I really want my player rankings to match tiers. So I actually don't. I will sometimes, because I do have an overall rank through the Fantasy Pros Ranker app, which you can find my rankings at goingfor2.com. But I also tend to approach it. I'll go by position. Okay, what's this tier of the position, and put them in the rankings. Then go to the next position and make sure I'm naturally kind of creating tiers. I think this last step really is one of the most fun, but it's also kind of a headache to do if your tiers are all mixed up. And I find this part fun because I kind of arrange my rankings already as the tiers built in. I know you guys both think of tiers as being really important too. I mean, this is where it really comes into play. Nothing about tiers?
I always draft for tiers. So like when I'm doing my auction, like I've never done a dynasty auction. It's all redraft. So I always put my guys in tiers within like $3 to $4, I guess you would say. So for example, like Chase, Lamb, and Jefferson would all be kind of in that same tier within like $45 to $50, I'd be willing to spend on them.
And it all depends on what your league budget is, right? And I know a lot of like auction content will talk through percentages, like this is the percentage on this player. But I do think that will still vary league to league, settings to settings. And that's why like I do this auction sheet like every auction I do, right? Because I feel like they're not, the settings aren't exactly the same. Your tiers might just be different enough that it's worth, especially if it's a different number of starters, changing what those calculations are, changing those minimum percentages. But once you have everything ranked, once you've got this, you've calculated your average, you've calculated the interval between each player rank in the auction, and you've mapped it all out from this average spot all the way down to the bottom, which is ultimately the interval, and then from the average all the way to the top again. You've got these amounts, you've got your players, and you've ranked them all. Now it's time to look at where these tiers are. Where can I save money? Because ultimately, you almost can never have the high end players go for too much. Like, yeah, I've always seen that at auctions. Just it's never a linear stepwise motion all the way down. It's those first few players, both in rankings but also timeline of when they're nominated, they tend to go for so much money. If you want those high end elite players, you have to be willing to almost overspend and change the logic a little. And you save money where you can, so essentially you can throw money back to the top. So what you see here is this column here that I've bolded now. These are the adjusted prices. Some of them are going to be higher than the original prices. A lot of them are going to be lower though. And E is just this was a random amount I can get to later. But this column here is all the savings. And this is all the spending essentially. Like all the money I'm saving in one column, I'm going to redistribute it only to the top tier, essentially. Who are the absolute players? Like, essentially, I'm kind of saying in a 10-team league, this is 7 players. To feel like I have an advantage, I want to get one of these top 7 players, right? If it was close to 20 deep, then okay, I want 2 of those guys. But like, in a perfect world, everyone's getting 1, but there's only 7, so there's 3 managers in theory that are left out. I don't want to be one of those 3. I want to have at least one of these top 7 players. Top 6 running backs or top wide receiver. If you included Baker, that would have been 7, but I didn't. I put Baker, I kind of kept his price. Okay, this is the price. Like, this is where I think he should go and calculate. I'm not going to adjust his price. Then you look just below. I've got Devo, who's maybe I should have adjusted his price. I guess I still would have won him anyway, as you'll see. But this next tier, Jacoby Myers, Darnell Mooney, Jawan Jennings. Starting wide receivers, target earners, and they certainly showed that last year, all in the same spots they were last year, and one guy's even getting a QB upgrade in Myers. So I felt they're all kind of the same. Devo's just a little higher because I had Jaden Daniels and I really wanted the stack. I tried to trade for Terry McLaurin in the offseason. It didn't happen. So I kind of wanted to, I chased that a little bit. Maybe I chased it too aggressively. Maybe Devo should have been in this too, but I've taken this money down. And what you'll notice is because everything works in intervals, okay, I'm lowering Mooney down 1 interval to where Jennings is and Myers down 2. It's all really the same amounts, and it goes back to these first amounts down here. Now, I guess this is a good example here to show of this tier breaking. All these running backs, it's, for me, handcuffed running backs because I've got Chase Brown, I've got Isaiah Pacheco, so I threw in their entire backfield. Taj Brooks, Zach Moss, Brashard Smith, Kareem Hunt, the vets and the rookies. They're all in here. They're all, in theory, they had different prices, but I've adjusted them all to be the same price. And what the heck? Jordan James, Khalil Mullins, Damian Martinez, all the rookie running backs that made it out of the draft that I thought were worth bidding up. I'll put them all at the same price. And you'll see here, that's like 6 players that their prices are adjusting. These 6 amounts here match these 6 amounts in the auction, these first 6 spots. So it's kind of the same calculation over and over again, which kind of makes it easy to calculate and copy and paste it. And then, every time you're adjusting down to the lowest player in a tier. And that's why I love working with tiers, right? So, okay, if all these players are the same, let's lower everyone's price to the lowest player in that tier. Let's maximize the money of this tier. So I kind of do that as many places I think apply. And again, I get this big column here that for those, you can, function total. As you see, this is like an addition, a sum of this entire column, which is 45 million in savings. And then this is where I spend it. So the first thing I had to do was, okay, this bottom contract because this is players worth bidding up, and you're in $500,000 increments. So if you're going to bid up a player, they've got to at least make it to 1 million. So Joe Flacco, starting quarterback, was the last player here. So instead of being at this just over $500,000, I moved it up to 1 million. That costs something, right? It costs 419,000, which is not much, but it's enough that I want to be exact and precise. I don't want to take, everything has to make mathematical sense, right? And you can't take money from anywhere and not put it back. But essentially, it's pretty close to this number. There's 44,819,000 divided by 7, which is these top 7 players, allowed me to increase their totals by 6 million each, almost 6.5 million. So now their prices are higher, giving me a chance to be more aggressive and get them. And frankly, a lot of them kind of went close to these prices. So it was actually, I thought I pulled that off well enough. And my original goal, again, of getting 1 out of 7, I guess I'll spoil this, is that I did end up getting 1 of those 7 guys. And it was kind of right around that price. And a few of these guys went around that price too. So it was all about, then did I make the right choice on which one I got? Then we can debate that. And I'd love to get your guys' feedback on it. But that's how I approach the preparation for an auction. Now, inside the auction draft, whole different story. But I like, because I think there's and especially these live RSO clocks, like it's 10-second timers. You've only got 10 seconds to make a decision if you're going to nominate, like bid up a player or not, what those amounts are. So I love having that set beforehand. Obviously, if you're doing a slow auction, you can afford to really see what the draft board's like and have these prices kind of create themselves, because you're dealing with like 12-hour clocks or 24-hour clocks. So it's going to take weeks and weeks. So you're going to gather information through the draft that'll help inform the picks. And this, it's tough. Like obviously any bid that happens, that's it's some information, but it's tough to see the whole picture while bidding, while like knowing your amounts in 10 seconds. So that's why I created this, because of the types of auctions I do. But even in the slow auctions, I still found it help, especially for those early price setting. Okay, I've kind of identified where I think those prices should be set, and I'll stick to it, especially early. So if we, like in Jamie's case, that like a guy like Jamar Chase is going, I've set a price pretty aggressively and no one's hitting it. Well, I'm probably going to win him. And it was less than I thought. And then again, Jamie, I do that too during the auction, which you said, like, okay, if I've saved $12 or 12 million on Chase, well, I can now spend 12 million extra on another player. So the next tier player, I can go above this amount. So you also, it's nice to keep track of that whenever you have access to, okay, I can go this much higher on the next player I want, which is how you can end up with Chase and Lamb. So that's a great example. It's funny how we approach it in terms of the individual player budgeting versus positional budgeting, but we come back to that same process of how it helps us save money in the auction, and it ends up being the same result.
Yeah, that was a lot. Well, that was a lot of information, but I think as you're explaining I guess the second couple of columns, it's like the auction equivalent of like trading back in like a dynasty draft. I like the idea of like pricing it at like the bottom of your tier, and that's how you like save the money. So it's a pretty good strategy. I guess all the questions I have, and we can get onto the official auction questions section whenever you do, but it is an intense environment to be in, and to be able to like navigate, okay, this player has gone. I guess like the big questions I would have is like, how do you stay like disciplined and like follow, the plan when, okay, let's say you missed out on Henry, Kamara, Davante, Chuba, Swift, the first 5 of your 6 or your first 6 of your 7 names. How do you like stay disciplined? And like, because in one aspect I could think like, okay, this like all these like 36 to 33 has been saved on all these players. Why shouldn't I just like spunk it all on like the 7th player? But like, how do you approach like, changing strategies, I guess?
Well, I would say it's saved on the player in theory if you win them, right? If I win them for less than they should have gone for. And I guess you've kind of have to draw your line at, again, I wanted to leave with one of these 7. So the first guy that goes up, I'm going to be, in theory, would be aggressive to bid on them. In this case, everyone was so aggressive that I'll just sit back and, okay, this got way too high. I'll wait to get the more optimal player. I will say, I'll tell you this, Rahul. I got 1 player, and there were 3 others where I was the final bidder that dropped out and let the other person get them at that price. So for 4 of those players, I was right in on it at the very end and had to kind of make that conscious decision
Mhm.
to go with. And also in this case, because you not only have the bid amounts in this league, there's also the contract amounts too, which will impact how you bid. Like that was also really important. Like, okay, who's going to get the big long-term contract? Like, how many years am I willing to give these players to get them at these certain cap hits? Because the
Mhm.
more years you go, especially for that first year cap hit, which is really all you care about, is this year's cap right now. Next year's cap is next year's problem. And I know that sounds very much like the Saints, but you're always, there's always going to be players on your team that are, well, unless you have no one on 1-year contracts, there's always going to be players that are leaving your books next year. And the cap, except for 2020, goes up every year. So you can count on that, especially in this format where the salary cap will increase every year too. So to kind of make do with these sort of how all the contracts are backloaded, they'll always increase every year. But it also could, because the cap goes up every year again, short of the year 2020. The cap did not go up that year. It went down. Thanks, NFL owners. Guys, that made me really that impacted me very practically because of the RSO, right? And that they have to stick to that, like whatever the NFL cap is. So that did affect me. So thanks, NFL. Really made me unhappy. But yeah, it's, to be honest, I guess Rahul is. I tend not to be patient. Like I make sure if I want one of these 7 players, I'm going to find a way to get one. And
Mhm.
I guess once you get one, then it's easier to be patient. Okay, I've got the one guy in this tier. I'm maybe I could try and overspend and push these, but maybe I won't. And that's ultimately what ended up happening here. Again, I was 3 other instances I could have gone for players and I didn't, and I managed to get the one. If I didn't get that one, I would have in some other spot maybe have spent more or been more aggressive. So I guess it's I tend to not necessarily be patient. I am willing to kind of spend early to
Mhm.
make sure I get the guys. Yeah,
So-
I know Jamie prepared a whole list of questions.
Yeah, I want to ask you
No.
one. So, do you nominate players that you actually want, or ones that you like hope others overpay for? Like, what's your strategy for like these early versus late nominations?
And I think I think that you mentioned early versus late. Like I think your strategy for me anyway, it does vary. I will change the types of players I'm nominating from players I want versus players I'm hoping either get for the minimum or people bid up, and I'll feel that's inefficient on their part to take money out of the pool. So it'll totally change, and it's not just timing. I think the one biggest factor is how much money do I have relative to the rest of the league. If I'm in a position where I'm one of typically, okay, if it's really early in the auction, my first nominee will typically be one of the elite players. This is a player I absolutely want. Get them out of the way now. How much do I have to spend on this player? And because if it's early and I haven't won anyone else, I have my full cap space. Like ideally, this is the time to do it. This is when I'm in the best position to go get the 101 in my books if he's available. So
Yeah, I like that.
But once you win that first player, I do tend to then, okay, now that I've won that big player, I have less money than most of the rest of the league. Now I'll start nominating the tight ends. Every tight end that's on the board. And I'll go down the list. Like I'll start at the big name tight end. So to be fair, I might even just do this in the first round anyway, but Brock Bowers will typically be a guy I throw up as a nomination right away. So Rahul, with auctioning with me, don't be surprised to see me nominate a bunch of tight ends. It's probably going to happen. I mean, if everyone else wants to nominate them too, that's fine too.
Well, that's what I was about to ask you next. Like, how do you approach like value bidding versus like targeting the guys that you want? Because like what I would do, I would throw out like CMC because I don't want CMC. I'll let other people overpay for them, bid on them, and then I'll get like my Derrick Henrys or even like a Jonathan Taylor for cheaper.
Sure,
Even
yeah.
later guys like Bucky Irving or someone that I'm not necessarily targeting. I want to get all the money that I can off the board before I actually go after guys that I want. So
Yeah,
how do you approach it like that?
Well, yeah, I think as soon as once I've got my first player, I definitely change my approach. And yeah, I'm typically finding tight end is the position that gets overvalued. So I just, as a whole, I'm just gonna and it's almost easy for me. But I just go to the tight end list and okay, who's next? And I just keep nominating that position, so I don't overthink it at times too. But then as soon as I get that minimum price tight end, then I really would flip. Okay, who are the injury risk players? Mr. Crutches Ayuk himself, I suppose, would be a guy I would like throw out just to
Send him right to me.
I guess, and I think you could only take it to a certain extreme.
Yeah,
You don't
I was gonna
necessarily
say-
want to. And this is where, back to my original point of, okay, like in this particular league, like I mentioned, 52 players on this auction sheet that I'm willing to bid up, but that still leaves 38 players that I think are worthy of minimum contracts, but I don't want to bid up. But those would be the type of players you maybe like. It's important to have a list. Like if we go back under Joe Flacco, the last player number 52, okay, the guy that's worth $1 million, let's say in this instance, and everyone else that's worth 500,000. I've got a whole list of 38 names right here, and in theory, this would have been the list I would have gone to if I needed to, and to a certain extent, I did at certain points. But like this would be the list you'd go to where okay, I really don't. I'm just gonna throw up a name where I almost hope someone bids them up, even if it's bid them up once or twice and goes from $1 to $3, or to $1 million or $2 million in this instance. Like that's just enough to drain just that much more money, and also someone else is using up a roster spot on them. But if I get them for free, I'm happy to have them. I say for free, like if you get them for the minimum price. But you also have to draw that list. Finally, anyone that was like in your rankings below those players, you shouldn't nominate at all because it's almost a waste of a roster spot to get someone that you don't actually think is worth roster. There's going to be some better player on waivers that you could just pick up. We'll just pick from that list instead, right? So if you have to like again, that's the actual question you have to ask yourself. So that back to the whole roster settings, how many total roster spots are there? That should be your cutoff. Whatever that number is. In this case, it was 90. The top 90 players is you should only be nominating from them. And don't nominate player number 91 because like that would be in theory be an inoptimal use of a roster spot. So like that's like the absolute hard line of really, but anywhere in that 90 players is like free reign. Nominate however you want to nominate. I guess there's freedom in that too, right? Like that's the fun part about auction. It's like you draw your own path all the way through. What's the like you can control what's the most you're willing to bid on a player, and you can control who you nominate when you're up. Like those are the two kind of like I've heard auction shows talk about that. That's the two things you have the most control over. So like nomination strategy is really important. So again, like I do it based just on where am I relative to the rest of the league in terms of money. Like that's usually the biggest factor in terms of how does my nomination strategy go.
Yeah, I've seen it where like people will nominate Brock Bowers and like McBride, let's say this year, and then Kittle just to get money off the board. But then the next tier guys like Jonnu and Laporta and Hawkinson, they go for similar values because people want them. So you have to be careful on your tiers and how much.
That's why I just love keep nominating them, keep forcing people to drain money, right? Like
but
they
it
see
also
these
gets,
yeah, I know it
gets to a point to where like you're at that Engram and Njoku tier, and then like you're already at almost 10 tight ends off the board, and now you're paying for your 9th tight end at like a higher percentage than you could have got Kittle.
Well, but so my point is, I just keep nominating until I get one for the minimum price. Like I'll just
yeah. So like Kittle at 22, let's say, but then he goes for 24. But then you get the Njoku, who's like $8, but he goes for 15 because there's people are overspending because he's the last guy left. So you have to be careful.
Like your max. Yeah, no, for sure. You definitely do. And that's why like it's at a position where you gotta, you do have to balance it out, right? If you see, which is also why like in those instances, you can't be afraid to just, okay, if someone does bid up $1 or $2, put it back on and see, okay, can I get one of these like mid-tier tight ends for $4 in a $1 bidding situation, or like 2 million, 3 million in these RSO settings. But yeah, I just, I guess that, like we said, like or at least there's times you want to nominate the players you want to win. There's also a lot of times in auctions you're trying to nominate players you don't necessarily want because you think other people will spend money on it. So it's important to kind of balance like when those times are. Like, do you find there's a big time where that changes for you, Jamie, where there's big shifts and you start nominating players you absolutely want?
Yeah, for like the first few, maybe my first 4 or 5 nominations, I'll just throw out people I don't want just so people get rid of their money. But also during that time when people throw nominations out for a guy that I want, I'll pay attention and make sure I get those people at a good price.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Again, you're thinking, and you've talked about like identifying overvalued players before, right? I feel like that's what you would use. Like, who's the, if you look at a snake draft, who's the round one overvalued player? Nominate that player first.
Yes,
that would be your. Would you do that? Like, I'm gonna identify 5 players, one in each of the first 5 rounds of a dynasty startup. This is the 5 overvalued players in each round. Go, and that's my first 5 nominations, ideally.
Yeah,
kind of how you.
Yeah, 100%. Just throw out people that you don't want. And then I also kind of pretend that I don't want some of the guys that I do want. So, like, when he's like going once, going twice, I'll be like,
oh, for sure.
14.
Like sometimes.
Oh, God dang it, 14. But I'll be like, dude, I'm getting them like $4 cheaper than I actually want them.
Yeah, no, I will. Something else people might notice, I definitely will sometimes let the timer go almost to the end, and then the next one do it immediately. And like I will just, I don't try and give any indication. I'm just, it almost looks like I'm doing it randomly. Man, is this guy an idiot or something? I'd like people to think that, right? Because then you can sneak up and get better value.
So I was also going to ask you, like, are there any like common mistakes that like you see during these drafts that are in auctions? Because I have a scenario that I just totally screwed up. And I threw out a guy for like $38. It was a running back. I forgot who it was. And everyone's looking at me like, "What?" I'm like, "Well, I got this guy priced at like 50."
Yeah, it's being too aggressive on the initial.
I didn't really want him. So like, don't throw out an initial like. Start at $1. Let people bid it up.
But it's hilarious, Jamie, because sometimes if you bid it $1 at a time, it might have got to 38 anyway. It might have even got higher to 38 because people are one at a time getting there. Sometimes that just big jump it actually shocks people, and you win it right there. We just saw that happen in this auction. It was David Njoku, actually, another player that was mentioned. And first nominate, I'm pretty sure, because he was a tight end. I'm pretty sure I'm the one who nominated him, 500,000, and then. Here he goes, like 3 years, 20 million right away is the second bid. And we all kind of froze. And then after that, that's like it's like less than 7 million per year. Actually, that's pretty good value. Man, we should have bid up on it, right? But it's like the initial shock of the jump sometimes actually freezes you. So sometimes that's almost to your advantage because it's people are shocked there, Jamie. But it would have been interesting to see if you had just nominated him, that running back, for $1. Would it have gotten to 38 or even beyond anyway? And maybe you did get him in value. So
it's funny because it was a guy that I didn't even really want. I forgot who it was. It could have been CMC like 3 years ago. I can't remember.
Well, who it was, CMC 3 years ago would have been amazing to have. I'm pretty sure he finished as like the RB2 next to Josh Jacobs or something.
I don't even remember who it was. I'll have to look it up. But
we'll say it was CMC, and it was actually a genius move.
Yeah, but no, I don't think it worked out for me.
It's funny because I'll talk.
It was a guy coming off injury. I can't remember who it was.
Well, CMC would make sense, I think. I'll talk about like my own mistake. I definitely remember doing this one time in an RSO. So RSO, it has, again, you can bid up to 4-year contracts, and so whenever you're bidding, and eventually I'll show you this, Rahul, and maybe we'll even show the audience too on an episode in a couple weeks. You can go, if you have those years available, you can bid any type of amount, 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. They've got those buttons for you, and it shows you the amount, the guaranteed money, the 2025 cap hit. But it's also done in a way that like the computer is calculating like the moment those come up, those would be like that would be the highest amount. Some people might bid in a 2-year amount, some might bid 4, so it'll change what those averages are. But like the computer option is giving you what is currently the highest amount. Now, someone else might click before you click, and so it becomes invalid, and a message will come up, and you don't have the highest bid anymore. Mm-hmm. But Jamie's still here, guys. He wants us all to know that he's still here. He didn't leave. But RSO also has a manual option. You can go 1, 2, 3, 4 years. There's a click a button for each one of those, like it's a little bubble next to each one number, and you click which one, and you put in your total amount that you're spending. I remember it was Robert Woods. We were bidding in the auction, and it was going, and I'm okay. I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna do what I said. The sudden jump kind of scares people, And then I got so into, okay, what should the jump amount be? It'll be this. I clicked, I was set. I clicked my amount because the automatic one was easier to do. I'm kind of waiting. Okay, next guy that bids, I'm just going to click this manual amount and I'm going to do it. And then I just clicked the manual amount, even though I was the highest bid. Even Akili was probably like, dude, you were already the highest bid. Why would you do that? It was so stupid. Like it, 4, 5, 6, whatever more million per year for no reason. It was so stupid. Got too cute. I was trying to get too cute with the strategy. I almost forgot. Oh wait, I'm already the highest bidder. I don't need to.
Yeah.
So that would be my biggest mistake I've ever made in an auction. Is almost overthinking yourself to a certain extent. So be careful. That's an RSO specific thing. Really be careful with those manual bids because some of the biggest mistakes I've seen have come from that. It's, I wanted a $10 million per year contract. So I put in $34 million for 3 years. I forgot to click 3 years. It was only a 1 year. So you had a $34 million cap it on 1 year. And don't use the manual thing, dude. Sorry. Should have mentioned that. Try to avoid that as much as you can. You can see how it can be difficult. So that's just I think specifically to RSO, that would be the spot you see the most mistakes, but they are useful. It is useful to do it. And I think I used it one point in this auction too. And I think that the best time to do it is on cheap players because your margin for how much you're screwing up is minimum if you're putting in small amounts. But I would say the two biggest mistakes, go back to my first thought, is people not being prepared, but also not being flexible. Like, you need to be both, which is hilarious. Like, because this rigid structure of this auction sheet, but you have to know how to not just stick to the numbers blindly. Like, roster construction is important, and that's not in the spreadsheet. And I can tailor the rankings I'm using to fit my team, but still, as you're building a team, roster construction is important. So you have to kind of make decisions. There will be times I'm in the auction and I don't. Oh, Jamie's back, guys. Just in case anyone didn't know. I guess the audio people might not know. I'm talking the whole time. No, for them, this is a solo episode. No, I love doing this. Thanks, guys, for allowing this. But yes, I think just sometimes a player will go for less than what it says on my auction sheet, but because I've already allocated enough money, this position, roster construction, I might let them go for cheaper. I'll let that person get that player cheaper. Typically, the players that are lower down the auction sheet, usually below the average or just around that average amount. The higher tier players, I think it's getting more important to try and bid them up and make them pay those amounts. But also sometimes I can almost go too hard on like what these numbers are and I think this is a good amount. I'm going to bid this player up to this amount and realize, man, could have got similar players way cheaper later. That's one thing I've noticed. One last quick auction tip: no matter what auction I've ever been in, typically, maybe RSO contract a little different because not every player is available. Any startup auction I've ever been in, wide receiver depth is always there. There's just too many wide receivers that are good and startable for everyone to constantly nominate. That at some point late in the auction, when there's barely any money left, there'll be some amazing receiver that goes for super cheap. So one thing about auctions, target the true high-end elite receivers. Don't worry about wide receiver depth too much in an auction, especially early, because late there's going to be lots of wide receiver depth available. It seems to always be the case, which is why if you have to start 3 wide receivers, get Jamar Chase and get CeeDee Lamb, get Jamar Chase and Jefferson. That third wide receiver can be pretty cheap in the auction, but actually like a legit every week starter for you anyway. That's the one thing I've always found true. Is always never go too many receivers early, especially at like really expensive prices. Wait till those receiver prices really drop. In other positions, like if you want an elite tight end, you're gonna have to pay an elite price. Same thing with those true top end quarterbacks. You just have to kind of accept that. Those are the positions where you can overspend and then get receiver can always kind of bail you out with receiver depth. You can't really get ever elite wide receivers late, but you can get really good receivers late.
So that brings me to my next questions. What was one of your biggest auction steals that you've ever had?
So RSO, it seems like some of these like startup auctions take hours and hours. Like we're drained halfway through, like mentally strained because like every pick you kind of have to almost be in on, right? Like in a snake startup draft, okay, you know where your turn is. Okay, if you have 2 picks close to each other, it's intense there, but then you have time to see. Auction, every player is going. You constantly make a choice. Every time you don't bid on a player, that's a choice. Every time you bid on a player, it's a choice. Like you're constantly making these choices throughout. Sometimes what I find, especially with a 10-second timer, is okay. You're adjusting. Okay, a player comes up, they're okay. You know, if he goes cheap enough, I might bid, but let me just adjust things. And then 10 seconds later, you hear the cha-ching, they were won. Like, what? You assuming someone else would have bid. And like, it doesn't happen every year in the same league, but I feel like almost once a year in my RSO experience, that happens. And I remember the very first time, the very first RSO startup we did for this league, 2015, I got Justin Forsett that way. And talking to people later, and everyone else just assumed someone else would bid. And this was Justin Forsett in 2015. So 2014, Justin Forsett. I don't know if you remember that, Jamie. All the Ravens. I mean, Ray Rice. Was that year? I think it might have been that year his career ended. So like the Ravens' backfield was a mess, and Justin Forsett kind of became the lead guy late, and he looked like a true workhorse running back. But we weren't really sure. Okay, it was just a 1 year thing. People were so unsure of him that year that like, hey, a true lead back for minimum price $500,000. Man, I got trade offers for him all off season. I definitely should have accepted because I was like, no, man, I want a workhorse back for $500,000. It's so cheap. It's amazing. Why would I trade it? He did okay to start the season, and he flopped late. And by that point, it was too late to trade him. So I learned another good lesson there is, man, when there's so much hype on a player, and man, people really want this contract, especially if it's just a 1 year contract, just trade it away for future draft picks because those things are going to help you so much. I was so young and naive in my time. But
Kyron Williams. Sorry, I was trying to clear my throat. My allergies are acting up.
But it's funny because that again, it happened to me in this year's auction too. I had a player that was even, I think, just above the average in my auction sheet, and I got them for minimum price. I don't know if it's people sleeping at the wheel. It's more I just overvalued this player way too much. Maybe this flag has something to do with it. I am Canadian after all. It was definitely a Canadian themed draft, but yeah, I think I've definitely seen that before where it's just I remember in a non-RSO league, I got Cooper Kupp so cheap in the startup auction. And it was one of those things where he just went so late in terms of when people were nominating him. And this would have been, I think it was 2021. It was might have been 2020 or 2021. We know what happened in 2021. He was the wide receiver one. And I remember I think he got him in 2020 on like a cheap 3-year deal. And like that's one of the things. As soon as you win a player and people start offering you trade offers because the contract was so good, it's usually a good feeling, right? Like instant trade offers after you win the player. Like, man, I really want that contract. Oh yeah, I know. That's why I did too. And then to have him like the next year turn out as the wide receiver one, that would be like maybe one of my favorite ever steals in an auction. I love Cooper Kupp. I've had so many RSO and contract leagues with Cooper Kupp. I've grown quite fond of him. And man, 2021, I think I won 2 different salary cap contract leagues that year with him on decent contracts. Like he was the wide receiver one. He was not making wide receiver one salary. And then that one particular league where the startup price was so cheap, and it was the only reason is because it just happened so late in the auction. He kind of fell through the cracks in the nomination order, and it came up so late that by that point, so many people didn't have money and they really couldn't make a bid on it. So yeah, I guess.
I gotta say, all this information is great, Kyle. My head is spinning quite a little bit, I guess, with all the depth to like the auction format to the RSO format. For someone like me, because I mean, the example that you showed, I think you said is a league that's been going on for almost 10 years. I know there's a select player pool. How would you translate, what you've talked about today to someone approaching their very first startup auction draft? I'm just looking at the cap summary right now for our league. I guess would you run this exact same exercise, but with the entire player pool as
the thing. Starter? This number is going to be a lot higher than 52. But yeah, you'd figure out. I mean, how many roster spots is it? I'm the commish. I set it up. I should know. I think it's 24 over 10, so 240 roster spots. Now again, this is 90 roster spots, and I've chosen 52 as the non-minimum, so it wouldn't be 240 for that bid amount. But whatever your percentage you think is valid to that, I suppose would make sense. Again, I kind of mentioned those percentages, right? Like how many minimum players are you removing?
Mm-hmm.
In this particular league with 12 starters, it's going to be 42%. In a scrubs and dubs type league, you're going to be above 50. If you're close to the middle. If it's a 12-team start 10 kind of stock format, you probably want to stick close to 50%. If you want to get a little aggressive, you might go to like 55%, and then just really get aggressive, more aggressive at least with those top end players. Less players you're interested in bidding up, and so more money towards the players you are interested in. But you probably do want to stick it. You don't want to go too heavy on the 67% and getting wild amounts, because you might really hurt your depth. Like it's great in theory, like what Jamie says, like start 8, just pay for 8 players. But there's a chance that 7th or 8th player might not be ideal in your starting lineup.
Yeah,
you overspend on the first 6, so it's a delicate balance. Again,
I guess especially in this. Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but in this format where we could start up to 7 wide receivers, the ability to, I guess, win on those like kind of the cheap guys that slip under the nomination radar really could make or break like the depth, how like strong the depth of a team is.
Yeah, for sure. Jamie, is there any other questions you wanted to get to?
Man, we've pretty much hit all of them. Like,
we talked about the bluffing thing, right? Like you'll
bluffing.
I was also thinking of like almost letting other people bid, like not showing you're interested in a player necessarily, and then as the bidding kind of gets closer to the end, okay, you can see that no one else is going. Then I start to oh no, it's too cheap. That'll start to come in. I've done that. Yeah, that even got pointed out with one of the players I won. Like, man, I thought I was only bidding against this guy. Then Kyle showed up and started bidding. Like, damn it.
And don't make the mistake of bluffing too high, like I did, where I threw out like $30-some for a player and no one else bid on him. And I didn't even really want the player.
I don't think I would ever. You see, I think that almost I think I'll just nominate Josh Allen for $1. I'll just do it for the heck of it. Yeah, it'll go up. But like, I always just feel weird nominating for anything more than the $1. And part of it is because RSO, you nominate a player, they're automatically up for 500,000. So you can't nominate for anything other than the minimum. But you can, which is why I explained earlier, you could bid up on your own bid. So if you nominate a player for minimum and you want to get them on a longer term cheap contract, you can do that really quickly too. Okay.
So wait, you're saying if I throw like a $38 bid and no one else is bidding, and I'm like, I bid myself up $40.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it probably wasn't a player that was going to go for 2. But like again, in that instance, if it was a good enough player, they might have gone for 38 anyway. You just made it a lot quicker. Like that was over in like 5 seconds, really. Like it's nominated, no one wants it. Okay, it's yours, right? Like that just sped up the draft process more than anything. Because again, some you will never know how much that was too much by. Because I mean, maybe if it went up by a dollar amount, you might have got him for 35 instead of 38. You might not have saved that much money. You could have in theory saved $37. Maybe no one was going to bid him, and you could have got him for $1. But the way, like if it was CMC or any type of like really good player that was injured, they're probably not just going for $1. They're going to go to a certain. So I mean, again, we'll never know, right? That's the beauty of an auction. Once those bids are made, and that player is set, like especially if it's a big jump like that, you never really know how cheap you could have got them for. I guess that's the beauty of it, right? We can always look back, but I guess we have to look forward. So if there's no further questions, I guess actually we're going to continue to look back. Just to quickly go through the results of this auction. And part of the reason I'm so comfortable sharing this in details because this auction is done, so no one else in the league can look at what my amounts are going to be. I won't telegraph it too much. But yeah, I've got the players here that were won, and I've organized them by their 2025 cap hit. Because as I mentioned, that's this year's cap. That's all we really have to deal with. Like if you're over the cap in next year, but you're not over the cap of this year, like for this year's amount, that's fine because that's a penalty for next year. The cap will inevitably go up. You have that much more time to also trade or cut players and make moves that way. So I've organized it by that. I thought that was just the fairest way. Like who's making the most money this year? And yeah, Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara, like those bidding amounts got crazy and they ended up on 3-year contracts. So even with how high this was, like I was expecting it to be like, okay, really, 47, 50 million maybe, but on a 1-year deal. Now, for reference sake, I mentioned I was going to come back to this earlier. This 40.56 million entering the auction this year, this was the highest cap hit in 2025. That was for Nick Chubb. So why he wasn't cut is beyond me. You can throw him on IR and it'll save the same amount this year. It's, if you put him on IR, you save half the cap hit. If you cut a player before the auction, you save half the cap hit for this year and whatever future years are coming. So effectively, you save the same amount of money. Just why even have him on the contract, right? The off chance you bring him back, whatever it is. But that was the highest cap hit up to this point. So it was kind of this like even higher than my initial amount on Derrick Henry, but it was always in the back of my mind. Like, I'm probably willing to make Derrick Henry the highest paid player. Same with Kamara. Certainly other people were too, because my amount was like 36, almost 37 million. Derrick Henry's average is like 53 million. This year's cap hit is almost 50.5 million. Like Henry and Kamara were wild. Like it was all the discussion in the draft. This took forever. Like the first two players took like 20 minutes because this took a while just for these two. Or the
So
like
why did they end up with 3-year contract? What was like what strategy led to them getting 3-year contracts?
So back to the whole idea of, every time you bid, you get all 4-year options available, but their per year averages are going to be different. And there's an algorithm designed to essentially the player wants the most guaranteed money for the longest amount of time. Mm-hmm. So it gets to a point where you can lower if to beat this bid, this 3-year, $161 million bid, but you want to do it on a 2-year or even 1-year contract, the cap hit would have been higher than 50 million. Like then you're dealing with this year's cap hit being 50, it would be probably like this 53 or 54, 55. So
and that last column, the 2025 cap hit, is the one that references it. That's what you did the step-by-step interval based off. It's just the 2025 cap hit. Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes it's the player average. But I generally look at the cap hit during the auction, because they will show that as part of those bidding amounts. Like when you're bidding on a player, this is what you expect for this year's cap hit. So I generally look at that as kind of the amount.
I see.
Again, this year's cap is all that really matters. I'll deal with next year's cap next year. But those two went for crazy amounts, at least what we consider crazy amounts. Two managers who had a lot of money. Also, the guy who had Derrick Henry also had Baker Mayfield. So he gave out the two biggest contracts. He also had the most cap space entering the auction, and he only had like 5 or 6 spots to fill. So he had the money to I could pick these 2 players I want, and I could make sure I get them. Like my approach was, I got these 7 players. I want to at least get one of them. Well, this guy, he chose to approach it. I'm going to get these 2 players. I probably said I'm either getting Henry or Kamara. He managed to get Henry, and he managed to get Mayfield as well. So his approach was to get those 2 guys, which clearly worked. He got them. So do they work out? That's what we're all trying to figure out. But the guys I wanted in that range, as you see here, they kind of all went for those amounts. Davante Adams, this year's cap at 36 million. I mean, that was close to what I was going to spend, like almost 35.5. Connor at 34.5. Aaron Jones 33.3, and Chuba Hubbard. Now, I put in bold the guys I got. So I ended up with the Canadian Chuba Hubbard. And again, part of it was getting him on the 4-year contract meant his cap hit was a little bit easier to go than these guys, specifically Connor and Jones. These were the 2 players that I was the last bidder that didn't win them. Like I was pushing him to these amounts. Jones 33.2, Connor 34.5. You see, it's pretty close to what I had them at, right? So I was kind of pushing them to those maxes. And even Hubbard, I didn't want to put Hubbard on a 4-year contract. I was initially going with 2 years because I looked at and part of my reference of what I want to spend ideally on years is I look at their actual contracts. And Hubbard just signed a 4-year contract. And I mean, he's the only one of these, I guess, other than Mayfield, who is on a 4-year contract. So if I had to choose a player of this top 6, top 7 to put on a 4-year deal, it would be Hubbard. But I initially just wanted the 2 years because I looked at the Panthers contract. Like they could, all his guarantees look like they're in the first 2 years. Like they have easy outs.
Yeah, and he's a running back, right?
Yeah,
second contract running back.
But I pushed him to 4 to get this average down, and so this year's cap hit is 30.8, which is saving a little bit on this 34.7. Even his average over the course of the contract at 35 is basically this amount that I wanted to spend. So I thought it was the best convergence of value I got. I liked the player. I liked what he did last year. I think he's still got a really solid role. And of this particular group of player, he's actually the youngest and just signed a 4-year contract. So I think the smarter investment on the 4-year deal, which is why I ultimately went Hubbard. The only thing that hesitates is Swift. Swift went for $25 million, but it also took a 4-year contract to make that happen. For his cap hit this year to be at only $25 million.
Mm-hmm.
In hindsight, I maybe should I have explored that more? Should I have maybe not bid up for Hubbard and gone for Swift instead? But with me bidding up Swift, just because this is the amount he went for, doesn't mean that I make one extra bid, I get him.
You made the right choice going after Hubbard.
Because you have to remember that DeAndre Swift is not good at football. So
because you have Roschon that's going to take over Swift. There's no way.
Okay. When you say you have Roschon, you mean the Bears or do you mean me? Because I actually do have Roschon. I do have Roschon on this team. He's on
there you go. You have Roschon. You have Roschon and you have Hubbard. So
I didn't spend $25 million a year on a handcuff to Roschon.
So do you remember? If you look at your contracts, Hubbard, you got so cheap, right? He was a 2nd-round pick, mid to late 2nd-round pick in his rookie draft. So was Roschon. 3 years later, Hubbard is the man. Now, 3 years later, Roschon's going to be the man. You don't need Swift.
Well, apparently I said that too because I went and got Chuba Hubbard.
But Kyle, I'm still sorry. I'm still a little I know you said you only play for the upcoming year's cap hit. So, but what is what is the penalty if let's say Chuba Hubbard turns to dust next year? What would be the penalty to get out of his contract? I think you said some 50%, but yeah, if you could just explain 50%. That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
At any point, if I were to now cut Hubbard, I actually wouldn't save anything this year. You only save money if you cut him for a year before that year's auction. So if you cut him right now, you're still doing it before the 2026 auction, 2027 auction, 28 auction. So it would save half the cap hit in those years. It wouldn't save anything this year. So
I have a question. What if you trade him after this year, next season?
If you trade a player, the cap's entirely off. Whoever has him takes on the remainder of the contract. Now, in season, it gets a little complicated because it's actually weekly contracts in season. So if you trade anyone before the season, they take on the whole cap hit. But as the year goes on, if you trade someone, you would just save the remaining. If you trade someone after week 4, you would still the first 4 weeks is on your cap because he was on your team for those first 4 weeks. Then weeks 5 through 17, he's on the other team's cap, wherever you traded him to. And that also impacts the bidding amount in seasons because right now the minimum amount is $500,000. And the mechanism to bid on free agents in season is you still use that $500,000 amount, but each week that passes, you enter that $500,000 into that amount, and the output of what you actually bid is lower. In each week, it gets progressively lower and lower because it's easier to take it's less of a cap hit to take on a minimum dollar player later in the season.
Yes, there are less games they can play.
Exactly. So and because it turns out to be weekly like that, even though it's it makes it look like it's presented on a season long basis, and effectively it is if you're trading out of the season. But once it gets to in season, actually these contracts do work weekly. So that is just that one facet.
Question: How often do you actually use real NFL contracts versus your contracts?
Well, I try and use the NFL contracts to determine what are the ideal amounts on every player. Now, one thing I usually do, and I actually completely forgot to do, was a column in the auction sheet where you've got the year amounts as well. Because I look through. Now, I only had to worry about 52 players, so I actually, one thing I do is I print out the sheet, and I'll take notes during. I quickly wrote them down to all the players during the Henry Kamara bidding because I was so out of control. Okay, I'm not in on this. So I don't think I made a single bid on either of those players because it escalated so quickly. And it was people were constantly bidding. It's okay, I'm not even going to bother putting something in. I'll wait and see when it starts to dry out. Okay, when are we getting close? By the time that happened, it was far beyond what I wanted to pay. So I was like, nope. Because I wanted one of those top 7 guys, but I also wanted to approach the next few tiers. And I kind of did to a certain extent. If you look at in the top 20 players in terms of their 2025 cap hit, I got 5 guys: Hubbard, Deebo Samuel, Cedric Tillman, Javonte Williams, and Ramondre Stevenson. So I was able to not just get Chuba Hubbard and get one of those top 6 running backs, but I also built some depth at wide receiver and got 2 more running backs in Javonte and Ramondre, who could potentially be starting. I think maybe more of a chance with Javonte. And what was nice with Javonte is just a 1-year, $11.5 million contract. It's one of my favorite contracts I signed because it's going to be, he's either a starter for Dallas, and I use him just for this year, and it's decent enough cheap cap it, and I might get good production out of it. And whatever happens next year, I don't care because his contract's done. And if it's a complete failure, here's the one way you can save money in season is you can throw any player on injured reserve. But you can only designate one player to return off injured reserve. So most of the time you put a player on injured reserve, that's it for the season. But if you want to save the money, you can definitely do that. Like you can put a non-injured player on IR, but know that might, like, you want to be careful on who you choose to designate because you, like, one of your star players might actually go on injured reserve and you want to save some money for a couple of weeks. You put them on IR, but you want them back, so you don't necessarily want to waste that designated to return either. So if a player like Javonte just really sucks, I could just throw him on IR for the rest of the year. And I think we have 4 IR spots in this league, so okay, I'm just wasting one on Javonte as a way to save $6.5 million if I need to, because we don't have a separate fab budget. Like your cap hit, like this is the money you're using in your weekly waivers as well.
And so how do you approach trades in leagues like this? Do you trade a contract? Do you are you making sure like the players that you're giving away their 2-3-year contract goes with them?
And so first off, like the system won't allow you to make trades if someone goes over the cap. So at any point, like everyone has to be under the cap at all points of the season. So you can't make a trade that puts you over the cap. The system will tell you there's something wrong.
That makes sense. Yeah, love it.
And so like just that alone, like that at least safeguards that no trades will ever happen that go against the cap. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because I've been in some salary cap contract leagues where you can actually trade cap space. Like cap space is a tangible, kind of like fab trading. RSO doesn't let you do that. I mean, you can exchange contracts as a way to save money. You can't actually trade for cap space. So like that makes it, I guess, a little restrictive to a certain extent. But I find, because here's the thing. In redraft, there's only one reason you're trading. Rahul, that's your favorite format, right? Like people are only trading to win. Mm-hmm. So the only time trades really happen in redraft is if 2 people have opposite feelings about 2 players, and they both happen to be like, you have the guy I want, I have the guy you want, and they can make that switch. And typically it's at different positions. Like that would be the other thing is, okay, I really need a wide receiver, I need a running back, and that's how you make those trades. But it's all for the same purpose, to score points. These teams in redraft are trying to make trades to win. In Dynasty, you can have opposite, right? Like you can have rebuilding teams and contending teams, and that makes kind of natural trading partners, which is why we see trading so much in Dynasty. It's why we do trade of the week every week, because we have enough trades. We can afford to talk one trade every week and still have plenty that we don't get to across the whole Dynasty universe. Oh my God, imagine how many trades there are. In salary cap contract leagues, people can trade to try and win, get points. They can try to trade to rebuild and get picks. Teams can also trade just to create cap space. I'm making this move simply to create cap space, either so I can bid on players on waivers or because I'm actually trying to make a bigger trade. And so while it can seem restrictive, I actually think it creates more trades because more people are motivated for a different reason. Now, you just got to make sure you find someone who has a lot of cap space that can take on your quote-unquote bad contract, and it's finding out those prices. You'll definitely see the Brock Osweiler type trade. Oh, you want me to? I'll take this player from you, but you've got to give me a pick for me to absorb this cap hit. Like I'll cut them before the auction. I'll eat the half of the dead cap, but it's going to cost you a third to do that. So you might see a trade where, heck, here's a trade for you. Someone offered me Andy Dalton in a trade, and so I accepted. It was Andy Dalton. That was it. There was nothing else in the trade. It was Andy Dalton a couple years, like 2 years ago. I think that includes, I think, 1 year with New Orleans and then his first year backing up Bryce Young in Carolina. His contract was like $900,000, 2-year contract. I see the offer in my inbox. I'm like, man, like it takes up a roster spot, but it's so cheap. Like this helps me go into the auction. I'm not paying a draft pick for this, but I'm also not getting a draft pick in return. But it's so cheap. thought about it. Like I think like 2 days, I think I struggled, and I just accepted. Like, yeah, why not? I'll just take Andy Dalton, right? Like that's weird. Like I'll trade you Andy Dalton for nothing. I'll just trade you Andy Dalton. I don't want to cut him and take the $400,000 cap hit of dead cap, which is so insignificant. It's hilarious. Apparently, and other people got the trade too, and they just rejected because they didn't know what to do with it. And I guess I was the sucker who was like, yeah, I'll take Andy Dalton, whatever. I mean, I think he got like a starter, like he got starts with New Orleans. I don't know if I actually used him for those starts, but like he wasn't.
Yeah, he had like a top 5
like,
QB week or time to time.
I mean, I'm still carrying Ezekiel Elliott on this team, and I didn't cut him before the auction because his contract is so cheap that okay, I can cut him and save like $1 million in cap space, but that's one more roster spot I have to fill. I'd rather have Ezekiel Elliott and Christian Watson right now because there's one special mechanism in this league is we cut down. We have 30-man rosters in the offseason. We go down to 26. I think the deadline for that is the Tuesday before kickoff. So 48 hours before the kickoff of the season, we have to cut down to 26 players. Those 4 players we cut, we get to save 25% of the caps. That's not that's a league rule specifically. So the commissions do have to go in and manually change that. But that's just extra mechanism. Like, okay, I'll cut Elliott and I'll cut Watson then. Because I mean, we're dealing with like 2 million, 1 million. Like the cap hit savings aren't going to be much anyway. Having them on the team helped me because that made less roster spots to fill in the auction. But now that we have to cut down, well, these are the expendable 4 roster spots, not necessarily players I want in the auction. So I'll make those decisions. I cut Marquise Brown before the auction because as you see, he was on my team, but you can see here he's won. He was the 26th highest player. 7.84 was the cap hit this year. The cap hit I had him on was like 9. I have it written down here. Is 9. It was 18.46 million. So by cutting him, I saved 9 million. And I mean, I could have won him back. And this was kind of close to what, like the half that I like. So I'm still carrying like 9.23 dead cap on Hollywood Brown. And whoever got him here got him for less than what I was paying him for. So it was a good move by them. But to me, it freed up a roster spot because that was like saving 9 million was significant enough. To save 1 million off Zeke, not significant enough. So like I make those decisions too, right? Who do you cut at what time do you cut? If the players got a cheap enough cap hit, just cut them in season and you don't save anything, but you're cleaning up the roster spot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I was going to ask you, our trade of the week, does it have to do with this actual league?
It doesn't. It was going to be a totally different league I wanted to talk about because of how this trade went down, and that it also it was pretty stressful. I don't want to say epic because it makes me sound more badass than I am, but it was stressful. It's funny because
say epic. Say epic.
I just want to get like a feel for like kind of trades that you make. This is mind blowing to me with this contracts, and you're also doing auction. So this is way beyond my way of thinking.
Well, not anymore. Now that you've opened your mind,
now that you actually explain it to me, like this is a whole new level. Like I'm leveling up. Like I'm getting to level 99 in Donkey Kong.
Well, Zach Ertz is almost as old as Donkey Kong, I think. But one of the because I was the guy that was nominating tight ends. I mentioned like David Njoku, David Njoku, who's I think you could argue was maybe the best tight end dynasty value wise in the auction. I mean, it was him or Kelsey. Like you can see, like I've color coded by position. We had Kelsey go for 13 million. A lot of the elite tight ends are obviously still under contract. And then we had on like this players 25 through 48, we had a lot more tight ends go. Right. And Njoku, I mentioned this contract, like a $6 million cap hit this year. And this was just, man, it went from minimum to 3 years, 20 million. And it scared us, but like it was the 28th highest player. Like that's what Taj Brooks went for way later in the auction. So like kudos to Greg. I'll shout out Greg because that was a really good contract on Njoku. But my strategy of just keep nominating these tight ends, eventually I got Zach Ertz for $2 million. So I got 2 Jaden Daniels stacks. Now this is where I'll say maybe I messed up. Maybe I shouldn't have gone for Deebo Samuel at 23 million. Like I got him for 23 million on 1 year, which if you look back here, like that's what I had Deebo for. Like even less actually, like 25.6. If you look at Jacoby Myers, who I had ranked right behind Jacoby Myers ended up going for 3 years, 36 total, 11.28 is the cap hit this year, like half of what Debo's making. If I had not, and Debo went first, and that's why, like, I was okay. I'm gonna go to the price I had him at, and I'll be aggressive. But then because I spent that much, I was, oh man, when Myers came up, I should have gone higher, but I didn't, and went so cheap. And then like Jennings and Mooney were also that cheap. So one of my mistakes here was actually chasing the stack on Daniels too much. And if I had let Debo go and got Myers, maybe instead of Ramondre, I do get DeAndre Swift. I have enough money to push that. And then I still get Zach Ertz with the stack. So I even as good as I succeeded in some goals here, and I really wanted Debo and I really wanted Cedric Tillman. I got both, but did I overspend? Even if I didn't overspend based on my auction sheet. Again, having to be flexible early, but Debo went early enough in the auction that we weren't sure what he was going to go for. We saw what Adams went for. And so I was going to push that to the amount I went to, and I was thinking maybe the other receivers go, and they didn't. So that was maybe the one mistake I made. I would argue trade of the week, but maybe I made a mistake too, but we'll find out. Are you guys, any other questions before we get to trade of the week?
Let's get to it. I'm
Got
excited
a lot
for this
to
one.
learn. I've got a lot
Right, so
to learn.
So this is a different RSO league. This is actually something that started last year. Actually, I mentioned this is the league I missed the playoffs in last year. That sucked. And yeah, I'm going to try and rebuild on the fly. And I guess part of the RSO format of you can, the free agent auction allows you to maybe rebuild quicker than through a traditional dynasty league. So there's the hope and optimism is always there, and it's so strong. It's almost maybe worse. But again, the Rory coaster of auctions and RSO leagues. There. So it's a 12-team league. We start 10 players, super flex PPR. I'll pull up the settings here, as you see. So yeah, so pretty stock settings in terms of just traditional dynasty league. It's an RSO league. It's a salary cap contract league. So that's where the extra context is. Now, this is actually 3 trades, but I've condensed it into this is the end result of all 3 trades. So I'll walk you through all 3. I just missed the playoffs, so I was I was 106. Like the 107 would be the last playoff team at 6th place. I was 7th place, so I started the 106, and Rahul kind of convinced me on Travis Hunter, like his optimism for him that I want. Especially after the NFL draft, okay, I want Genty because I had Josh Allen and Jared Goff, so I wasn't so interested in Cam Ward. I really want Genty, Hampton, McMillan, Hunter. I want one of those 4. I want to find a way to get into the top 4. And I was looking at some trades, and honestly, of all those people just in front of me, it was actually the cheapest to get to 104, and I gave up my 106 and my 206 to move up 2 spots to get to 104 to kind of guarantee what I figured would be a receiver. Yeah. I figured. Man, I doubt Hampton gets there. Cam Ward went 102, so I was trying to trade up aggressively to the 103. What do I have to do to move up 1 spot? And they wanted Hampton, so they took Hampton. And then I kind of felt it was almost disappointing to go back receiver, and also what I giving up the extra rookie pick. And with Cam Ward having gone, I thought I do have some room to maybe move down. I tried to move down to the 105, didn't quite work, but he was kind of hemming and hawing. And it felt like I trade lower to then trade up. Like I want to get to the 105, but I can't directly go there from 104. So the guy at the 107 he was trying to trade up aggressively too. Actually, he had the 104, so he wanted to make back-to-back picks. And so he offered me his 107 because he had 2 firsts. He had the 103 and the 107. He offered me the 107, his 26 second, a 26 third, and his 27 third. Essentially, it was like he had made so many picks that he was down to just having first-round picks. I was basically taking all of his depth picks, we'll say. So 4 picks to move down 3 spots. I thought worth the risk. And then Ted McMillan goes, and I just got so stressed that I wasn't going to get Travis Hunter. Like there was, man, did I mess this up? Like I was already in position. I could have just taken so many thoughts in my mind, and eventually I settled with the guy at the 105. I gave up the 107, the 209, and the 26 second I had gotten the other trade. So entering the draft, I had the 106, the 206, and the 209, which is why we see them here. And then I got the 105, but I also was able to get a future third back as well. So you guys want to go trade by trade or just analyze the whole thing?
Yeah, let's do the whole thing.
Well, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, I got essentially to get the 105, really to move up one spot from 106 to 105. In addition to the 105, I got 2/3 in 2026 and a third in 2027. So
I don't mind that.
4 picks on that side. To move up that spot and get those extra thirds, it cost me the 206 and the 209. So I had to go from 106 to 206.
Wait. So you gave up the 206 and 209 to move up one spot?
Well, and get a bunch of thirds, but yes.
That's gross, dude.
It's not free reading. I do think there is a tier break between 105 and 106.
No.
That being said, I do not like this trade, Kyle.
Dude, like honestly, like 107 is like where I would try to make that tier break, not 105, 106.
I see the tier break after Tet and Hunter, before the two Ohio State's running backs, even Harvey perhaps.
And those were the next 3 picks. Like that was 106.
So let's just go over this. So you have Genty, Hampton, McMillan, Henderson, Ward, Hunter.
I would not put Henderson that high. I don't think Henderson. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and I clearly me neither. That's why I really wanted to trade up to get Hunter, really, because I thought
I would even put Judkins at 10 in that same tier.
And that was like the big, running backs and the value there. Like, do I get to 107 to just do that? But I don't know. I really wanted Travis Hunter, and so far this is the only league I have Hunter in. So
I don't know, man. I took Henderson over Hunter in a bunch of leagues, and I'm happy about it. And like 2 years from now, I mean, we're gonna be saying, why is people picking Hunter over Henderson?
I guess we'll find out.
We'll have to find out. Yeah,
we could just as easily be saying, why are people taking Genty over Hunter? Like that might be a discussion point. Like it's in the range of outcomes. I don't know that it's likely. I don't think it's likely.
I think Kyle, it feels a little bit like you might have panicked, especially
I feel like I panicked for sure.
Yeah, especially I think knowing you and knowing how highly you rate RJ Harvey, I think coming back to the 107, then to jump back to go up and get Hunter, I would have thought you would have been a little more content at that spot. But in the end, if you get your guy, then is really too mid to late seconds. Is that really too much of a blow? I don't think it's.
You could have easily got Trey Harris or.
But I don't think it's like franchise altering. It's not great, but it's not the worst move in the world.
I don't know. Just give me the Scadaboo, the Higgins.
Man, I'm rising a lot on Scadaboo, I gotta say.
No, to Jamie's point, Trey Harris did go 206.
Yeah. So goddamn, give me Harris at the 202.
Tyler Shuck went 200.
Damn.
Oh yeah, I guess you could have. I guess Shuck, Scadaboo, Kyle Williams. Yeah, 206 and 209 are definitely not.
Scadaboo went early. Scadaboo went 203.
I mean, I would have just took Jackson Dart at the 107 if you had the 107.
Of course, you would have.
Yeah.
Well, and again, if I had stuck at the 107 based on how the board fell, it would have been Quinshon Judkins. We can
that's awesome.
Him that pick. But I will say, with knowing how. Okay, so I guess I didn't talk about how rookie contracts are structured.
Yeah,
typically they're
that's a good
3
question.
or 4-year contracts. Most leagues I've done are 4-year contracts now, and it's at cost controlled price, and it does in a certain sense move like the auction, it moves stepwise down. Typically, the 101 is more expensive than the 102, and a little bit more expensive than the 103, all the way down. And 112 to 201, there's usually a bit of a jump, and then it continues to kind of move downwards like that. So the 412 would be the lowest salary among
makes sense
the rookies on the rookie contracts, and again at 4 years. Part of me also believes in quantity over quality of rookie picks. And I like that I got the best pick in terms of I got Hunter, but the fact that I have 3 seconds versus or 3/3 versus 2 seconds, I'd actually take that in this format. I think in traditional dynasty formats, there's probably no way I would have done that. I also wouldn't have thought it was too much. Okay, 206 just to move up to 104 to get McMillan or Hunter. Like I wouldn't have thought that was bad of a price, but I guess I did the trade, and I even told Rahul about it too. I thought, oh man, I got a top 4 pick. I might get Hunter. And then I disappointed by going and trading down. But when I look at it, okay, like I'm getting Hunter on a 4-year contract, but I've also given up 8 years worth of contracts to make it. Right? So I managed to still somehow stay in that top 5, get Hunter, and through the combination of trades, I ended up leaving the trade with more picks than I actually had.
So
they get pushed out a year, that's one part of the equation, and then they get pushed down a round from 206 to 09 to 26.
So you did mention you rather go quality. No, you said you quantity over quality.
Because the cheap rookie contracts fill up more roster spots. So when you go to next year's auction, let's say, that's like 2 less roster spots I have to fill next year's auction because of the extra thirds, right? And you still push that a year forward too.
Look at it in this way. Like, would you rather like nurse a nice tasting stout beer or shotgun Milwaukee's best?
I'll take whatever's here.
Yeah. So, like when you go to a strip club, are you gonna get like
water.
4 lap dances from like the ugliest girls, or would you rather?
What is going on here?
We talked about money, right? This is how Jamie does auctions.
So like I'm going after that nice looking like blonde girl with curves, and I don't want the Dollar Tree over here. I'm gonna go to Giant Eagle or like Myers, like the good grocery store, and get quality fruit. I'm not gonna go to the dollar store and grab a basket full of rotted fruit.
But I see there are extra variables to the trade. I think one that I'm like kind of hearing, though. Jamie's metaphor is great, but one that I'm kind of hearing is like with the way like the price steps down with each pick. Like it's really important, even almost more important in like the rookie drafts to really identify your tiers, because even a 1 step up into a higher tier like could mean like exponentially more value because you're getting a much better player on just like a 1 step up contract.
And by making it complicated, like even if I took Hunter at 104, his salary would be higher than what it is now at 105.
Yeah,
even exactly. Just moving around to move down 1 to get it more. Apparently, like, not to toot my own horn, but Luke Patrick said it was a masterclass after it happened. Like after the last trade went through, and I got back and took Travis Hunter. He's like, man, that was so impressive. And part of me was like, man, it didn't feel impressive as I was like doing it. Like, there was so much regret and panic perhaps involved, but then leaving it though again with the quantity of picks.
It doesn't read good. It doesn't read good in like a 1-line summary. I'll tell you that much. But after you contextualized it, I see the vision. I see the vision.
Anyway, and that's, but like, and when we, why leagues need context. I just gave an hour and 48 minutes of context, I guess. But like, this was auction drafts. I think that's the context of this whole conversation, and that's that strategy behind auction drafts. Obviously, the preparation going into it was a big part of this, but then also strategies throughout the auctions, and then end results of what trades look like in some of these formats too. So thought it just a good overview of these auction leagues, and I guess in this case specifically salary cap contract leagues. Was there anything that I said that was confusing or misleading or needs to be addressed to you think, guys?
I think you hit it on the head, man. Like you are the master of these contract leagues, and auction is just another aspect of it. And I love listening to you, and it just made me smarter.
Yeah, I resonate completely, especially as someone who's never played the format, is about to jump into what kind of sounds like one of the more complicated ways you could play in the format. But I feel like you broke it down like very I always butcher this word, in a very methodological way, with a process. There we go. A process of how to figure out how to bid on players and like get through the draft. So great breakdown, Kyle.
Yeah, we appreciate all your knowledge, man.
Well, I appreciate you guys. I also appreciate all the viewers, listeners. We have lots of stuff here at Fantasy Six Pack. We've got the website, fantasy6pack.com. There's the Fantasy Six Pack Discord. Of course, the podcast feed, so be sure to subscribe, rate and review wherever you listen. And of course, the Fantasy Six Pack YouTube page. Lots of great shows, whether they're live streams or pre-recorded videos. Be sure to like all the videos. Be sure to comment through them, and of course, subscribe. We really appreciate if you do us that favor. We're also on social media, the three of us. Rahul's at SmallTalkFF. Jamie's at Jamie Perog. I'm at Senra Says. Not auction. There's no auction in the name, but auction's the game, that's for sure. Any final words for the listeners, guys?
Going once, going twice. Sold.
Well, that's the best way to end the episode.
That was
we'll
pretty
see you
good.
all. Yeah, I agree for sure. Thanks, guys. I think I know I spoke a lot. I took a lot of time here, but thanks for allowing this. It's fun. Next week we're going to talk about Jamie's favorite format, and if you want to find out what that is beforehand, head back a couple weeks to our favorite fantasy format episode or our fantasy favorites episode, and yeah, favorite formats was discussed there. So, Jamie, you'll get to take over next week and be your best self, I suppose. You're always at the top of your game, though. But yeah, we're looking forward to that next week on the next episode of Dynasty Six Pack. Bye for now.